Reference photo for today. So I thought for still life, we just start really simple with just like three objects. And then you could take some of the skills from today and then expand on them later. But I just tried to pick three, an image with three objects that were different. So we could get some different shapes, we can get some different values. My printer did print it, maybe a little bit darker, but I also have it up on my screen. So we'll talk kind of about values. Going to spotlight my video. And then if everyone just wants to make sure their mic is on mute a minute, but as always, pop in anytime you have a question, totally fine. Whenever you need to ask something, or if you need me to stop, or anything. So we'll kind of talk about values, but sort of our process for drawing this still life today, or how I approach any still life, whether this is from a reference photo or we physically set objects in front of us and look at them and have a light source on them so we see shadows and highlights and all that good stuff. But the first thing I do, is of course spend some time looking and observing. Okay, so we've been talking about this in our drawing classes for a little while now, that it's so closely connected to seeing and observing, that muscle memory. So what I do when I observe is I just kind of take note of a few things. First of all, what form am I seeing? So we've got kind of the cylinder shape, the sphere shape. I take a look at dark areas. Where is it really dark? Where is it really light? What does the overlap look like? What object is in front? What's behind? And then of course we have some simple cloth drapery here, so we could think about breaking these into shapes too. So, this can become a shape where we're seeing a section of dark, whereas this little strip of light can be a separate shape. So when we're initially drawing, we can just identify these values with simple lines so we can start to place things. Likewise, and again, if we're getting more familiar with contour drawing, meaning the outlines of things, or shift in value. So what that could also mean is where I see a light shape, I can draw those shapes in, okay? And that's going to help me when I start to add value, okay? So first things first, let's go ahead and just kind of get situated, and hopefully, if there needs to be a better view for you as well, let me know, but I want to try to have this up so you can see that, as well as the my paper, of course. I'm just using just a regular HB pencil for now. I'll tell you if I switch pencils, but of course you could do this entire drawing just with a number 2 HB pencil and be just fine. So first things first, let's kind of talk about the order we're going to draw them in. And of course you can work in any order you feel comfortable in. There's no right or wrong, but I just my natural kind of approach would be the mug first. That just makes the most sense to me, to put that mug in first, kind of put that in as an anchor point. I can sort of use this as a reference to how maybe tall this needs to be. So it's, take one of the mug and then a little bit taller. So I sort of use the objects within the frame to sort of measure other areas. You could also, of course, grid this as always, but getting away from the grid, some other kind of tactics I use to measure things, proportion things, is just looking at the object in reference to the other object for scale. And you can do actual things where you measure with your pencil, make little marks if you need to. It's really up to you. I do start kind of,
do you start with the object, like you said, with the mug? When do you do your background?
Great question. So when I start with the mug, I just this is where I think the individual artist just comes into play, and you're going to start drawing what feels natural to you. After this mug, I might start to draw maybe the bottle, then put in the lemon, and then I would start to frame in the background. Probably the last thing I would do would be the background. Cool. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm just on sketch paper here. I'm going to start with this ellipse right here for this mug. And I'm just drawing kind of light, keeping it kind of sketchy in the beginning. And again, as always, you can erase when you're sketching. You can kind of lightly let your lines overlap if you need to. But I'm not worrying about like any super major details, just kind of, or sorry, minor details, I should say. I'm just worrying about the major ones, just the major shapes, the major shifts in value. I can illustrate that with lines. You know, pay attention to like little things like those angles that the mug creates. And if it's helpful for you, you can draw on your reference picture too, you know, and actually practice, okay, this one kind of goes this way, and then this is more vertical. Then I can kind of match that on here. This is kind of at an angle, this is vertical. Those are just little things I do to kind of help myself with proportions. And then what I would do is kind of get the whole shape of this mug in first before I put the handle in. But again, that's just my approach. I want you to know that just because I draw a certain way doesn't mean you have to copy me exactly. It's more the general idea, and kind of keeping it loose in the beginning and then refining as we get closer. Now, here's an example of where you might find it helpful to draw in this little shape right now, because it does cover a portion of that mug. So you could just draw a little line in of that cloth there, and then kind of, it almost creates where that lemon goes. And that's kind of what's going to happen, is you almost, in a sense, know where to go next, or at least that's going to start to happen for you if it doesn't, or it hasn't yet. But to me, this kind of natural flow is like, oh yeah, I could sort of continue this over, or, you know, maybe I could work on the bottle and come back. It's, again, it's what you feel good about and feel comfortable with. I'm going to go ahead and just finish this mug too before I get too far ahead of myself here. But I think as you start to draw more, as I mentioned, order of things is going to just start to feel more comfortable, feel natural. So, you know, kind of just go with the flow on that a little bit in the beginning. Then, you know, you can kind of think, you know, look at spacing. Okay, I know that handle comes up a little bit from the bottom, but then up here, there's not as much of a space, so it goes up a little bit more. So sometimes I'll put in little markers for myself, and then I know I need to connect those two. So that can be a little kind of trick or tip when you're sketching and you're working on proportions. And I know some of you are just love to draw quick and expressive and just work so much faster than me. And with these classes, I would say work at your own pace too. If you like to speed up and go, 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 do your thing. But I do like to just kind of take my time, especially for those of you who are newer to drawing, because I think it helps to slow it down so you can just see that process. So, you know, before I add that second line, I might just check my shape now, because I want to make sure this curve looks good before I add that second one, so I don't have to erase later. And I can already see, I feel like I should bump this out a little bit more, give it a little bit more of a curve. And again, you're just going to notice the more and more you draw, the more, the less erasing you're going to do, the more accurate it's going to be. That stuff just starts to develop very naturally. It just happens. So, you know, don't worry about being fast When I say quick and sketchy, that just means allow yourself to be loose, allow yourself to not just use your wrist, but use your shoulder, use your elbow, allow yourself to move. You can still take your time and draw slower. Don't feel like you need to be quick. Although if you were here last class, I did mention that little exercise where you draw as fast as you can looking at the picture. Keep in mind that's a great way to warm up. You could even do that before we start class, you know, spend a little time with the reference photo before we begin and notice how that improves your skills. Okay, so after I get kind of this mug done, and again, I draw a little bit slower too during my classes, but I just want to make sure everyone's feeling good. So if you feel like I'm going too fast at any point, hop on and let me know. So I am going to do this lemon first because it is in front and I think it's going to help me frame the bottle better. So I'm just noticing that there's a shadow here, but the lemon does get pretty close to the edge of the cup. So it's kind of touching, coming down. I kind of notice the shapes that the shadows create, and I kind of look at my own drawing and say, oh yeah, it's like a triangle shape. This is a triangle shape. Okay, that matches. Okay, that can be a helpful little tip. And then I know I can kind of curve this around, and it's following the shape of the cloth a little bit. And it kind of comes off of the cloth, right? Because we have a shadow here. So again, notice, almost think of the shadows as shapes as well. They are shapes, okay? So the more you try to break down shapes you see and try to match shapes, it's going to make your drawing a lot more accurate. And you know, if you're still feeling like, oh, I don't know like what my style is or how I draw, just know that that's going to happen and unfold very naturally, and I wouldn't even worry about that at this point. Unless you're a more seasoned drawer, then, you know, and that's even something we can chat about. And if anyone's ever interested in having like a one-on-one session with me where we just draw together one-on-one, or I kind of give you individual feedback via video, please email me. I would love to set up video chats, little kind of conferences with each of you if you'd like that. And that way I can help you one-on-one individually with your specific kind of skills and where you're at. So now that I've got kind of this loose shape, you know, it's pretty circular. I can kind of change some of that as I shade. But now I can see where this bottle is starting to come in. So I know it's kind of in the middle of the cup. So this is an example of where I might kind of frame it in. And then I know it kind of comes about to here. Okay. Then again, I know that the bottle is more than double the height of the cup. So about the height of the cup is coming up to the neck of the bottle. So if I want to, you know, I could use kind of that cup as a general measurement guide and say, okay, like comes up just a little bit more just to kind of frame it if that's helpful for you. You know, I just think some of those little things can help with proportions in the beginning when you're getting used to drawing objects, multiple objects together. But again, I think still life drawing will improve your drawing like nothing else will, especially objects in real life. So a good challenge after this class would be to set up some objects in front of you and try a similar kind of process where you're observing, looking, loosely drawing the shape, and then starting to shade and add those details. Bring that up. And I'll look at the kind of top and look at where it kind of comes out a little bit, where it goes back in. Now, the more time you spend observing and looking, the more your drawing is going to look accurate and have that information you're seeing. Remember, you can, change things if you need to. You can erase, you can, I think this needs to be brought in a little bit. But spend time, I think making adjustments, sometimes as frustrating as they can be so helpful in learning about drawing, because you're taking that time to slow down, to observe, to make a correction, to make it more accurate. And I think the more you do that, you're going to find in the future, the more accurate your drawings are going to be too. So after I kind of get, let's see, it's kind of loose shapes, and this is maybe it's kind of a little bit shorter than it actually is, but I'm just gonna go with it. I think you are all learning about me that, I like to be a little expressive and loose, just my style. So from here, where I'm going to head now is, of course, drawing in the drapery folds or highlights. So this little strip right here, I'm just drawing on the actual picture just so you can see too. And my proportion here isn't fully the same here. We talked about in other classes how you can draw little boxes and frame. I just kind of started on my paper, and that's fine too. But keep in mind, if you want the orientation to be identical, you can measure, make a box, and that can help too. But since I didn't, I'm just kind of extending the fabric folds, which is fine too, just a different way to do it. Again, I'm just gonna kind of draw just so you can see where these start to come down. And again, these are just kind of helping me block in where that shading is gonna go, what's light, what's dark. And we see there's kind of like almost like a little triangle shape right here. Kind of comes down. And then we see kind of right through here into the handle too. You see a line. Then down here, I got this one is already in, but then there's another one right through here. And then kind of on the other side, I drew that little dark circle. That's this right here. So I kind of see how that fold comes over here. And again, this is cut short because this is cropped. My paper keeps going, so I just extend it. That's fine. And then I see a little bit of a shadow right here. So I could have a little line here. And then some of this other stuff is pretty soft, so we can just kind of shade that in. But I do see, oops, camera. I do see a line over here, about here. And we do see the little guy, or can't think of what that, what it's called. And I mean, even if you want to, you could look at how there's kind of, it goes darker to medium to lighter. If it's helpful for you, you could draw in kind of those little bands just so you can sort of see where some of that shading is going to go, and kind of consider directionally that spherical shape. And then on the mug, we almost see kind of a highlight coming down through here. It goes up. And these just kind of shapes are going to help us so we know where to shade. And same on the inside. This side is light, and then this side is going to be dark. Just kind of do that for now. And then same kind of deal on the bottle. The bottle just has a lot more going on, but I just draw the shapes that the lights create. And they can be very specific and exact, or they can be loose and based loosely on this. Now, keep in mind, you can also do some erasing as well if you end up shading more than you need. But just kind of, I think for me personally, especially when I was starting drawing and I was newer to it, I found this to be helpful just for my own visualization and seeing and using a reference. So again, if you find this helpful, do it. If you don't find it helpful, don't do it. Yeah, glass can seem tricky, but really it's almost, it's an illusion because it's just putting lights and darks and creating this kind of reflection that, you know, obviously glass creates, and it's just done by shapes that are light and dark, and you know, it's really dark here, it's medium here, and a little bit lighter here, super light here. And if we just mimic that, draw exactly what we see, even if we don't know what it is exactly, we're just mimicking the shape, we can create some really fun reflections. So, you know, as we start to draw more together, we can even do different surfaces. We can do, you know, zoom up on a reflection and draw something in the reflection. It's really fun to paint reflections as well because you can just layer the colors. I think painting helps you learn reflections really, really well. So, you know, more of that kind of stuff will come that will just kind of help you continue to build your skills and continue to get better and better. So pretty much at this point, it's ready for us to start adding shading to it. Now, you can, if you're striving for like hyper realism, if that's your goal here, then what I usually do is take my time and maybe do a little check where I just check myself. So I can already tell you one thing that, and I already mentioned this, that proportionally, actually my bottle should be probably a little bit longer. Okay, so this is where traditionally I would fix that, right? But you as the artist, again, I've mentioned this to you before, nobody has to see your reference. This can just be a photo and or an image. And when I look at this without the reference, to me, my bottle, it doesn't look funky. It looks fine. It's only when I compare it here that I'm like, yeah, this just looks a little skinnier and taller compared to mine. So again, that's, you decide if you want to go for that exact realism making it like exact, copying information exactly as you see it, or if you want this to be an expression of this, a stylized version that you're drawing. Really, the choice is yours. And I always stress both because I want you to know that no matter what you choose, it's good and it's great and it works, because art's for everyone and there's so many styles. And I just want you to, you know, create art you enjoy looking at and you enjoy the process of making. But as always, you know, think about your goals that you have. If you're striving for realism and accuracy, then take your time and slow down and make those corrections. It's worth the time. A drawing that we start together does not need to be finished, you know, today. Drawings take time. Sometimes our classes can be viewed too as a starting point to get you going. And, you know, I've started to do multi-session classes that people seem to be enjoying. So, you know, we can have more multi-session classes even with these drawings if that's something you're interested in. Or we could do, you know, a month-end review and we take a look at all the drawings we've done over the month and kind of critique them and look at them and add finishing touches too. So, you know, we have different options. So I'm still just using a number 2 HB pencil. I just happened to switch to my drawing pencil. And what I'm going to start doing now is I'm going to start blocking in my darks, my really dark areas. Well, and I do have a lot of dark, but I'm going to pick my darkest darks and start there. So when you're shading, keep in mind you have different ways to shade. And I'm just really quick going to pull this out and show you, because some of you haven't been to some of those beginning drawing classes or you're newer. And so I just want to show you several approaches to shading, and you can pick what's comfortable to you. So you can do what's called hatching or cross hatching, and that's just a series of lines. And then cross hatching is when you cross them. Lots of lines closer together appear darker. If they're spaced further apart, it appears a lighter value. Okay, I love cross hatching, but it's very expressive. It's lots of texture. It's not as blended unless you cross hatch in like every direction. When you cross hatch in every direction, that center, because it's overlapped so many times, creates a natural blend without like a blending stump or a tortillon. Okay. Another way is like a tonal shade, and that's just that traditional back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth that you probably have been doing forever, back and forth, back and forth. You could also scumble, which is little circles, and you can just go in kind of all directions. This scumbling eliminates the linear look of the up and down or side by side, back and forth lines, and just makes it a little bit softer. You could also stipple, of course. Stippling takes a lot more time, but it's super, super cool, and that's just a series of little dots. You can even scribble your values, where it's really loose scribbles or really tight little scribbles for dark values. So just to show you, you know, shade however you want. And if you know, feel like you need more help with shading too, feel free to email me, because that's something I can assist you with. But typically I'm kind of a cross hatcher. I like to be expressive. I like the juxtaposition of blended areas and kind of loose areas. It's just something I've always enjoyed. Also, I've mentioned this too, when you're working in different areas, you can use a clean sheet of paper to cover your drawing for your hand so you don't get smudgy. Because keep in mind, graphite's super duper smudgy. So to keep that drawing clean, without those extra smudges, unless you can handle keeping your hand lifted, I find that very difficult to do. An extra piece of paper can be super, super duper helpful. But yeah, I'm just going in and kind of blocking in those dark values, just so we can start to see some contrast. And you know, I don't work object by object. I hop around. That's just how I like to work. And I feel like my drawing tends to feel more unified when I hop around versus when I sit and work on one object and then move on. But again, that's just my way I like to draw, my workflow. You can choose for yourself the way you like to work. So I always just stress that. I like to tell you what I like to do, but you can, you're going to figure it out. That's the fun part about art, is there's a lot of those individual aha moments of self-discovery when you're doing it on your own. And as always, if any of you have any fun tips or tricks that you've learned in your experience, please feel free to share them with the class too, because I think we can learn so much from one another as well. I just pay attention to those little shapes I see, and I try to recreate them with my pencil. And again, I'm just using an HB right now, just trying to block in some of that initial value. And then I will push those values darker with some B pencils after. But even if you don't have B pencils, just think about the pressure. Starting with light pressure and then layering heavier pressure, even with the same type of graphite, is going to darken it. I just can't stress enough, don't be afraid of those dark values. Dark values compared and juxtaposed next to light values creates contrast, which creates depth. Things tend to look more realistic when we see a full range of value compared to just one or two, or if it's very gray. If it's very gray, it looks very flat. We need those light lights and those dark darks to round things out for sure. So as we're drawing, we still have a chunk of time together. And depending, we'll kind of check in and I'll see how your pace is compared to mine. But if you feel that you would like to continue this drawing together next Sunday, we can. We could also work on another still life together and repeat the process. Or we could try, another object or another subject too. So, I love suggestions. So I so appreciate those of you who've given them to me, because I'd rather us draw the things you want us to draw too than just what I choose. I mean, I don't mind choosing, of course, but I think it's fun for us to get to do other things besides what I pick. And then the other thing too is keep your pencil sharp. You don't want it to get super duper dull, because what we want to keep in mind is the tooth of the paper. In order to layer that graphite, we're starting to fill in all those white areas. And if our pencil gets too dull, it won't be able to get into those light areas. Also, if you're a finger smudger, resist the urge to smudge with your finger as well. Because remember, we've got all those oils in our fingers that create smudges and inconsistencies in the graphite. So if you like the blended look, but don't have a blending stump, you can always use tissue. And honestly, bath tissue or facial tissue work, soft napkin. Honestly, paper towel might even do the trick. Or even a cotton ball or Q-tip. So you can be creative. Just avoid the psh psh with your finger. I don't know if any of you have the urge to do that, but I remember I always did when I was younger, at least, before I learned what was happening. The other thing is I don't worry about all my blending initially because I can come back and blend and layer later. But if you'd rather slow down and blend and work as you go, you can too. So I can show you a little bit of what that might look like. That's just me kind of slowing down, taking my time on those corners, you know, thinking about starting to round that out. That's why I like cross hatching a little bit too, because I can go up and down and kind of side to side and start to pull in that form. Because when we use our lines directionally, what that's doing is helping us create form. Okay, so we can go back and forth. And the more we layer that up, the more blended it's going to become. And I'll just show you for any of you who maybe have any B pencils, when I, like this is a 4B, so when I put that 4B on top of the HB, I just want to show you how much darker I can pull this. Okay, and then, I mean, we can even go darker than that. That's just a 4B. And look at the difference right there. And I can, you know, start to pull out those really dark darks as I want to too. When I was in college, I actually took 2 different drawing classes where we drew a lot of still lifes. One was just all graphite, and then the other we would do Prismacolor pencils and some other materials and things like that. But the all graphite one, you know, we'd spend it usually a minimum of 3 hours on a single drawing. And taking time shading, learning about shape, proportion. So I guess with those classes too, I just really learned to slow down and take my time with the process of drawing. But at the same time, if you are a quick drawer and you're sketchy and you're fast and you're expressive and you're loving that, keep going with it. I think that's amazing too. So I want to stress that, you know, even with this process, you can embrace your own style. It does not need to look like anyone else's. It doesn't have to look like mine. The beauty of art and, you know, the beauty of being individuals is just that, right? Is we can all create something different even though we're looking at a similar thing. We're just using similar skills, similar processes, but doing it in our own way. Again, the more I layer this, I haven't even done anything with blending. I'm just layering my pencil at this point. It just blends with the pencil itself. So keep in mind, graphite's very blendable on its own. You don't have to have another tool to blend it unless you want to. But play around with different lines, play around with different pressures. If you're still struggling with value, you can, you know, practice a little value scale on the side. Might hop around to a couple other areas. Just, I'm not done with the mug by any means, but I just kind of want to show you, you know, some of the other things, the bottle and some of the drapery and that, while we have some time together. So like even in all these little sections, again, this is why I think it's so helpful to have these shapes here, is because then I can look in here and be like, oh yeah, this is the really dark strip right here. And I can fill this in nice and dark. And I just know it's nice and dark. And again, how realistic you want this, you want the information to match, the shapes to be the same. If you're okay with it being a little bit looser and loosely based on it, be looser. but slow down and take your time if you're striving for accuracy. It's okay to draw slow. It's okay to have a drawing take a couple sessions, but it's also okay to finish it right away too. So to me, I love the shading part. I think to me, it's bringing it all together. I mean, drawing the shapes is really fun too, but there's just something about seeing the contrast, seeing it actually turn from a shape into a form, into something that looks three-dimensional, into I've created space on this flat piece of paper. And that transformation just starts to happen with the value that, you'd refer to that as like the rendering process of applying texture, of applying value and all of that. It's just fun to see, the pops of dark next to something that's light and vice versa. And just kind of seeing it all to come together bit by bit or piece by piece. And then all of a sudden, you've got something there that you've created. So it's a pretty, drawing is as simple as it is, it's a pretty magical and fun process. I think it's a lot simpler than we think it is, but it's easy to be intimidated too when we see finished, beautiful rendered drawings and we're not sure how they did it. I think that was the biggest kind of aha moment for me in art schools when I started to learn all these different processes. It helped me appreciate the art that I saw because I could then understand what went into it. But just notice how I'm, trying to match. If there's a lighter gray, I'm making mine lighter gray. If it's super duper dark, I'm making mine super duper dark. You're really just looking at what's there, and don't let your brain try to get in your way, because your brain is going to do that. It's going to say, don't make that line like that, or what's that, or that looks weird, or, but just remember, draw what you see, draw what you see. And as always, you can do the upside down tactic. If this is helpful for you, it's really the same exact idea, right? There's no difference. I'm still looking at the darks. I'm still, mimicking those shapes and those lines. I'll turn it around just in case any of you are referencing mine as well. But the idea is still observation, looking at shapes, breaking it down, matching values. And then it's rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And then all of a sudden, you're going to notice your drawing skills have greatly improved the more you do it. But I truly, truly think if you want to become a really good drawer, whether that's realistic, whether that's stylized, but you just want to understand form, shape, texture, value, still life drawing's the way to do it. It truly, truly will just overall improve your skills. Plus, some of my students don't get super excited when we do still lives just because, sometimes the subject matter is not the most exciting, especially to a teenager. I kind of like bottles and oranges and mugs, so I kind of enjoy the subject matter. But you can set up anything. I'll encourage them. They'll have still lifes with candy. I've had students fold origami and then draw the folded paper origami with all the shadows and lights. Oh, it's so cool. So I think once you realize, they realize, you probably already get this being an adult, but once they realize, well, a still life is just anything that's not alive, it's just any object, and that's like almost anything I want it to be, then you can start, things get a little bit more interesting. You could set up, you know, a little still life that told a story, or, you know, something funny. Toys can be fun if you have, you know, grandchildren at all, or, you know, younger kids in your life in any capacity. I think toys can be fun. Jewelry can be fun. Flowers, potted plants. Obviously, any bottles of wine you have at home or other bottles can be fun. Silverware can be fun, or utensils in the kitchen. You could even like take a whole bunch of them and drop them and take a picture from above and then draw this whole like crazy arrangement of, you know, utensils. You know, play around with composition. You know, it could be really clean, or maybe it's like a mess. Maybe there's stuff going off the page. You know, you can be creative and have a lot of fun with your still lives. But, you know, at the bottle, I just kind of would repeat everything I'm doing to fill that in. And then same kind of idea with the orange. I'll just kind of put a little bit on here, just since we've got about 9 minutes left, but I do want to have time to check in with everybody too. So when I'm starting to shade something that's like a sphere, you know, I'm playing with that shape. I'm utilizing that shape. I don't want to just go up and down or side by side. That's going to flatten it. Keep in mind, patterns flatten things. So when we're doing things like cross hatching, we don't just want to go up and down, side to side. We can still cross hatch, but we need to be mindful of the contour, of the shape. So we want to think about that sphere and the direction that it goes. And that's going to help us get something more accurate, more realistic, or stylized. Because even in things like cartoons or some of those animated movies, more recent ones, even though they're animated and they're cartoony, they're still based on reality. So we still want things to, even if they don't look hyper realistic, we want someone to be like, oh, that's an orange or that's a lemon. I'm not entirely sure actually if this is an orange or a lemon. I'm thinking, I think I've just called it both. So some type of citrus. But, you know, pay attention to, you know, those shifts in values, especially when it's very subtle. I will say my picture printed a little bit darker than it actually is. This isn't quite as dark as over here. And I can start to fill in this, and I'll just layer up that value, increasing my pressure as I go. And then as far as, I just want to mention the drapery a little bit too, because, you know, we just, sometimes an hour is just not enough to complete the full thing. So for drapery, it's really a very similar idea, except for a lot of the shapes and shifts are just a lot softer because it's a folded fabric, and the surface is different than that of the mug, that of the fruit, that of the glass bottle. So because the surface is different, the light affects it and hits it differently. So what we're really looking for is, still we want to pull in what's dark. So, I mean, this little triangle area and some of these areas down here are what's darkest. But the cloth isn't super duper dark, except for like in these little shadow areas. So I just kind of do the similar kind of thing and place those kind of shadows where I see them. And same kind of thing here. And I'll show you just kind of maybe from here to here to here. So this is darker because the fabric is starting to go back. It's starting to fold. Whereas this is that kind of curve. So this is like the top, and then it's starting, I'm just gonna draw a little arrow. It's starting to curve back down this way and curve back down this way, okay? That's what's happening. So because of that, this strip right here is a highlight. It's lighter than everything else because it's closest to the light. And then it starts to get darker. So we actually shade cloth drapery much like we would a cylinder, meaning it's gonna go like this. Okay, so this is a highlight. This on either side is what we would refer to as a midtone. And then as we pull away from the midtone and the highlight on either side, it gets darker. So this kind of loops around this way, loops around this way, thus this being the highest point. And if you look at most folds, that is exactly what's happening, give or take a little bit. The shift could be different. But if you look right here, that's what's happening. Here's that highlight. As we start to go around, we get to a midtone. Now this happens to get darker, whereas this then comes into another fold. So that's why it's give or take a little bit. It could not have this, but then come up into another fold too, coming up and then back down. But kind of generally speaking, that's how it goes, is you've got these highlights next to midtones, next to what's referred to as a core shadow, so CS. And if that's confusing too, we can always do a drapery specific class. But we only have a few minutes, so I am going to go ahead and I'm just going to stop right there because I think I at least got to mention most of what I wanted to talk about today. But I just would love to, take a few